Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Thanks to the Podcast Academy for having me. Nancy and I weren't really sure whose Wi-Fi is being spotty, if it's hers or mine. So if it's mine, and if you can't hear me at any point, if you could drop a comment in the chat, that would be much appreciated. And bear with me 1 second. Yeah, there we go. I think it's still working out. I see a comment in the chat. I'm going to share my screen if you give me 1 second, because I have a PowerPoint and making sure I'm sharing the right thing. I'm going to assume that you can see my screen. If you can't, please let me know, or if I'm sharing the wrong thing, please let me know. Could somebody let me know if you can see in the Q&A that you can see the slides? Let me see the chat. Yep, perfect. Thank you, Marta. So hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you. Really happy to be here for a topic that is very, I'd say, near and dear to my heart and probably a lot of people right now, which is how much the deal making scene right now is shifting. And there is no right or wrong answer here. And so I would really love to, whether it's questions that you drop in the Q&A, whether it's things you're encountering as you're negotiating, things you're seeing that are changing, questions you have, best practices. I'll try and make this as interactive as I can by voicing your questions throughout. So please don't hesitate. I would love to hear from you. We get better at it as an industry at this, the more we exchange and find solutions together. So the reason why the Podcast Academy and I were looking forward to hosting this topic is deals are looking increasingly different every single day. And while we started maybe in an ecosystem where it was pretty simple, right? You had a podcast, it was distributed through an RSS feed. One party funded the show, controlled all the distribution rights through the feed, ran the ad sales, relatively nice and easy. Deals are looking really different now. And that means they're more challenging, they're more interesting, and they're far more nuanced. And there are a lot more things to anticipate and to map out. I mean, it's never been truer than it is today that a contract's really an opportunity to architect the relationship between two parties. And it's really coming across, I think, at this moment now. And I'll try and weave in some examples as we go. I don't have a legal disclaimer slide, so I'm going to say it orally. Obviously, every deal is different. So please consider this as educational information. It's by no means meant to be specific legal advice, but I think everyone's clear on that. Now, part of why I think deals are changing so much is because of the concept of who a content creator is also changing, right? A content creator can lead in so many ways. You know, it's not just a podcaster. What's the difference between a podcaster and a content creator? Yeah, more and more we're seeing people who are considered traditional content creators on social become podcasters as we've traditionally conceived of them. And there are so many different things that a content creator can do today, right? I mean, you can create content, but it's not just about the content you create, it's how you relate to the content creator. And that's part of the sweet spot of what a lot of these podcast agreements are trying to do is address and anticipate all the different ways in which the universe of content is built around the content creator, how you connect with the content creator, who gets to make those decisions, how are those things managed, how is the revenue monetized, and all of these arrows that are pointing in different directions are just a few things that we're seeing pop up in agreements today that I certainly was not seeing in every single agreement 5, 6 years ago. Some of these, sure, but definitely not all of them. And so I think part of the complexity is the challenge that's arising today is in due part to the fact that content creators today are really personalities around which an entire media and IP ecosystem is built and how people are looking to connect with them. So I'm just going to go back for a second. The way that I've organized this presentation and this discussion is 5 key ways in which I've been seeing deals change. Now, there are definitely more. I'm sure I've left out some of them. I'm sure I've maybe prioritized some that maybe others wouldn't have. So if you have other ones, please drop them in, and I'll try and erase those as well. So one question that is coming up, which might seem basic, but it's, how is a podcast defined in the first place, right? Because you're at the top of your agreement, it's going to say podcast agreement or podcast distribution or podcast production agreement, and you're going to have a definition of the podcast in the deal. But I don't think 5 years ago, the question of the definition of the podcast was as nuanced as it is today. And there's a real question in the industry of whether podcast is still the right word. So I've dropped here just some quotes, which some of you might recognize from people who you've heard at panels or different people. It's, a lot of these come from execs at different companies or heads of audio who have shared their view of what a podcast is today. And as you can see, if you run through the list, these are all very different. I think number three, there's the podcast summit in New York a couple of months ago in February. Somebody there said, is podcast even still the right word? Because if really what we're talking about now is content that can be broadcast in multiple different places, are we really talking about the new broadcast as opposed to the podcast? Is it a simulcast? Community and fandom, the fifth point there, to me, I think is very much related to why these deals are getting more complicated now. Like I said, because of this awareness and desire to build an ecosystem and monetize the ecosystem around the content creator, with audio just being one part of that, that is in part why these deals are also getting more complex. So these aren't necessarily definitions you would put in terms of defining the podcast in your deal, but they do go to show that aligning already on what is this podcast that you're doing? Is it audio? Is it video? Is it, is a digital series also going to be caught under the term? If it's a YouTube, if it's shorts on YouTube, just exactly what falls under the universe of your definition of the podcast. Because if you haven't defined that clearly, then anything else might fall outside of the scope, even of that one defined term. Part of the art of drafting deals is you try and make your defined terms as telling as possible, because once the term is defined once and that's agreed, every single time it's used, that's what that means in the deal, or what it doesn't mean is excluded. So the definition of actually the podcast, the defined term in the deal that's going to appear hundreds of times, thinking really deliberately, probably much more so than before, about what that is and isn't. So just some questions that have, well, I alluded to these, right? If it's we're seeing Netflix just licensed Miss Rachel, which started on YouTube. What is that now? Is that a TV series? Was it ever a podcast that was on YouTube, or did we never consider that a podcast in the first place? If the deal that you've covered covers a podcast, but then it gets licensed to Netflix, does whatever happened on Netflix get covered by here? I'm using Netflix, fill in any other streamer. I'm just using that because that's the example with Miss Rachel. And I've seen a lot of this conversation on YouTube, on LinkedIn and other places, of how do you define the line between a talk show, a podcast, a social media post, a digital series. Conan O'Brien's podcast just announced, I think yesterday or today, that they're going to launch more video, that they're going to be doing video episodes on YouTube that are going to launch more or less, I think, in the mornings of when the audio launches. But either way, so you can start to see, it's interesting, right? Somebody who was formerly in television and then podcasts and now it's video, the lines are increasingly blurred. And is that something that your agreement has thought about, anticipated? And does the contract allow for the content to move through the entertainment ecosystem seamlessly? Which party has the rights to do that, and how is it monetized? So just a very basic definition of what are the two parties doing together, and for what aspects of that do they want to be in business and not, is a threshold question in a very real way now. Who controls and monetizes distribution rights? This has always been a question, but to me, it is different now because it is getting increasingly more difficult, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, for one party to control all distribution rights, because we have audio rights, we have video. distribution of monetization rights, social media, and all of the other arrows that we saw in that first slide before. And anytime rights are held non-exclusively, your contract needs to specify really clearly who is using which rights and how. And so on the next slides here, so let's start with audio, right? Audio typically is exclusive, but even in the audio exclusive ad sales, right, which have traditionally been exclusively held by one party, and still, I think today are largely held on the audio rights exclusively by one party. There's still some nuances there that we're seeing now that we weren't seeing before. For example, if the audio sales are held exclusively by one party, does the other party have the ability to take the RSS feed and make it available on their website? Like, can the talent make the RSS feed available on their website? Because maybe the talent who still controls their website wants the podcast to be featured on their website. And maybe the ad sales, the distributor's fine with that as long as it runs through the RSS feed that they're monetizing. To me, those questions were coming up less before, right? There was one party that was uploading the RSS feed, it was going certain places. There was less this notion of, well, where are all the different places that I as talent want to reach the audience, and how do I make sure that the contract doesn't prevent that? Because remember, when we're talking about audio rights, it's not just the monetization, it's the distribution. The distribution means who physically makes the file available, and the monetization means who monetizes it. And often in deals, we don't realize, but it says that the hosting, the actual making it available, is held exclusively by one party. So unless the other party asks for and makes clear of all of the different ways they want the show to be able to be made available into the world, it's only this party here that gets to do it. So I see a lot of these questions that are coming up, right? Like third party licensing. Okay, party A, you exclusively sell ads against audio ads against our show. But if you've said that they have the exclusive distribution rights, does that mean that the talent can license the show to be available Delta on an airplane, right? You can have podcasts on planes, different places. How do you square off licensing with the actual distribution rights? Um, there's all kinds of questions now of Spotify, for example, with video, right? As far as I understand, if you make Spotify, you have a video episode available on Spotify. Spotify pulls the audio from the video and not an RSS feed. So if you've granted exclusive RSS-based rights to a party, can you upload the video to Spotify? Is there something in your contract that prevents that? So even in what I would say is still the simpler scenario of exclusive audio hosting and sales rights, there are still more and more questions that I see pop up in a way that didn't pop up before, just because there are improvements and the platforms are changing. There's one at the bottom left that I haven't said yet, but YouTube has been saying or testing that it looks like at some point in time it will be available to people to dynamically insert ads into YouTube. So as opposed to just the native ads that appear automatically from YouTube that you have AdSense revenue for, that it would be possible in the same way you dynamically insert ads in your audio episodes to do so in video. So again, if you've given exclusive ad-based rights to a party, does that mean that if and when this becomes available on YouTube, who gets to make dynamic advertising available on YouTube? Is it the party that holds the exclusive RSS-based ad-based rights? Is it you? Has that been addressed? Questions that didn't need to come up until today and that are coming up now that I find super interesting. Video sales, where they're, typically a lot of the time we're seeing video non-exclusive. Why? It seems to be one key reason that no party has yet been able to sort of claim the higher ground of having figured out video monetization, and everybody's recognizing that. And so these are often much easier for parties to agree to handle non-exclusively. But where they do decide to handle them non-exclusively, then you have all kinds of questions, because non-exclusively literally means each party can do it. And if each party can do it, how do the parties do it together efficiently and in a cohesive way? And that doesn't compete with and cross cannibalize each other in the way they're doing it. So how are the parallel sales efforts coordinated? Who gets priority over the inventory? This was discussed. This recently came up. Well, if let's say party A and party B have non-exclusive video rights, and we both have bids for the episode for a video sponsor who wants exclusivity, who wins? And the contract can address that. One way we discussed recently was, well, should it be, because presumably the two parties are giving each other passive ratios, though not all the time. That's another question, right? If they're held non-exclusively, does it mean that each party gets to sell and retain 100% of what they sell? Or does each party get to sell, but the revenue is split and accounted to the other? And obviously the party who sells presumably keeps a higher rev share. All of these questions can be addressed in the contract and probably should be. Otherwise, once you start selling and actually activate the deal into the world, you're not going to have parameters of what it looks like. You can't plan for every single thing, but there are definitely things that are inherent with non-exclusive rights that the contract can plan for, even for the multimedia campaigns, right? When this happens. So if one party A is selling audio and party B, sorry, let me say that again. Party A is selling audio and party A and B are both selling video. If party B has interest in a campaign for video and audio, then what happens then? Does the contract say that the portion for the video of whatever deal they made, there's a portion of the revenue that runs through party A? How much of it is allocated? How do you figure it out? Is it what you figure out in the deal with the advertiser? So there's really, like, all the questions that I've put on this slide are things that, contracts we've done recently have gotten into detail or made decisions, or if they haven't made decisions, have specified that they will need to be agreed prior to the ad sales effort starting. Because you don't want the contract to get in the way of the part. Some of these things may need to be figured out as they go, but as you figure them out, they should be memorialized, and at least you have a roadmap going forward. So it's a real balance between trying to anticipate, but also giving the parties the breathing room to figure out what are essentially relatively new arrangements. So relatively complex, but a lot of fun, I think. Subscriptions comes up a lot as well. Again, this ties in, I think, completely to the notion of content creators and a podcast being about community and fandom. People like to support creators directly. And so does the talent retain an ability to make subscriptions available? And subscriptions to what? Is it subscriptions to the podcast? Does the talent just have a general talent focused Patreon, Substack, something that's general to them? If it is, does the funding party want the talent to run the show on that subscription service and promote it? And it's even getting more interesting now that, if I'm not mistaken, places that have typically been subscription only and behind a paywall only, like Patreon, are also making it possible to have the RSS feed run there. So it's you're able to get everything a little bit everywhere in a way that you weren't before. And so how do you account for that where the distribution rights are split? The third question is the third big question that I think is a way that things are changing is, how are live events, merch, and other derivatives and ancillary rights managed? And if you've picked up on a theme in this presentation, it's increasingly being split, right? Typically, you look back a while ago, most deals, one party, the party who owned the show, who funded the show, controlled live events, controlled merch, controlled derivatives, everything. That's becoming, I'd say, not necessarily standard across everywhere. I think it really depends on the party's relative strength, and does the talent or the creator have an established track record in making merchandise and live events? Does the commissioning party actually, even though they're funding it, the production company, do they actually see benefit in events being marketed and positioned and run as though going to the creator primarily? Our audience is going to be more likely to want to buy tickets and bill tickets if they feel like this is something that the talent is, being fairly, if not a majority, compensated. So there's all kinds of ways that live events and merch and derivatives are also sometimes being held on a non-exclusive basis, but then the same questions happen of, how do you manage each? So if the events, and this has happened a lot, I've done a few deals where live events are split. And a very basic question, but where the production company is wrapped by one agency and the talent is wrapped by another agency, who's actually going and gets to pitch and sell and do events? Who's going to lead on that effort? Who gets to decide which costs are spent? If the rights are non-exclusive, is there a commitment at least that X number of live events be held? Like, is the commissioning party that's funding the show asking for that, or X number of merch drops? Um, you know, I saw there was an article recently, where in Bloomberg, where Ashley Carmen made the good point in her article. If you if podcast related events are what are covered, then what's stopping the talent from just doing an event that is not related to the podcast, but is sort of on similar themes? And does that take it out of the podcast live event? Like, how are live events in your deal defined? So a lot of questions there. And I certainly feel like contracts are going more in a direction in the same way that you need to address how non-exclusive video sales rights are managed. You also really want to drill down on the details, because the truth is contracts tend to be opened in one scenario, one or two scenarios, which is one, when you want to know who gets to decide what, whose decision is this, or when things go wrong. And so it's really important to actually think through what non-exclusive rights look like in practice and try and anticipate the ways in which people are going to want to go back to look at the contract to figure out how they're doing things. The fourth question is, how does the deal optimize for promotion on social media? And I decided to specifically pull this one out because so much of an issue to date, and part of why YouTube is so popular, is discoverability and visibility. And so what's one way in which you make your show known to the world is through social media, right? If the talent, the host, the content creator has a large following on TikTok, Instagram, X, having promotion of the show is going to be a huge way to get people to know about the show. And for sure, deals that I have seen over, you can see an increase in the specificity with which deals address marketing. You used to have 5, 6 years ago a sort of throwaway line that the show would be, the talent would engage in customary marketing practices, whatever that was supposed to mean. Now you see actually people drilling down. You'll post at every release of every episode, and for how long, or you'll do a story, and how long does the post remain the most recent post, and all of that is good. To be clear, at the end of the day, I think that you don't want somebody really posting just because contractually they have to, so hopefully that's not the reason why they're doing it. But definitely seeing more people go into detail around both promotion of the show, but also, really interestingly, I was chatting with somebody recently who sells a lot of video advertising, and they were saying, you know, a lot of our advertisers would like to know that if the talent is posting clips on social media from the show, they're not just posting clips from the show at random, that actually, if the distributor asks them, can you please repost on social media the host read ad, or when you picked up whatever was the product that was placed, that they'll do it. And that's also something, does the agreement actually discuss that, right? It's not just promotion of the show on social, it's which clips from the show will be posted and who gets to make those decisions. So definitely a lot more detail going on there. Again, also social media sales. I honestly haven't seen yet to date an agreement where um, any talent is giving just blanket approval to promote on social media, right? Social media is their brand, their name. And so to the extent there's any advertising, not necessarily for the show, but I mean advertising for a specific advertiser, right? Advertising sales against talent, social media platforms tend to be all subject to the talent's approval and very much an iterative discussion. I've also seen a lot of places still where the talent wants to reserve that, or the talent's agency wants to carve that out or treat the revenue share for that differently. So there's a lot of questions that are being asked right now. And I think it's about striking a balance between, on the one hand, unlocking the huge potential of that audience and being able to promote the show to the content creator's audience, while at the same time preserving the content creator's voice and coming up with language that gives clarity in the deal to what the contractual commitments are going to be, without how to say, without I guess unduly adding limitations on the creator's voice, and sort of some feeling of freedom. Like, you want promotion to feel somewhat organic, but you want a backstop also to point to in the event that the promotion's not happening. So it's a really interesting line to draw. And the fifth question I've pulled out here is whether advertising clauses take into account both audio and video advertising needs. And what I mean by that is that we've all seen the typical, host will agrees to read X host read ads per episode. You sometimes see requirements about honoring host read ads for a certain period of time after the term for episodes that were recorded during the term. And you see the typical, ability to disprove a certain percentage of submitted advertisers and excluded categories. Fine, nothing new there. But let's say the host has agreed to read, I don't know, 4, 5, let's say 4 host read ads per episode. In what though? In video or in audio? If you've done 4 video reads for a show and for a podcast, like 4 video ad reads, and the quality, for some reason, when you just pull the audio, it doesn't work so well in audio, and you actually want the host to reread the ads just in audio, can they legitimately say, I already did my 4 host read ads? So does the agreement account for the transition from video to audio, or the other way around? How is approval language worded? And then again, this concept of, approval over social media. Well, what does that really mean? Like I said, is it approval just over advertisers on social media? Is it approval over any clips that you're asked to post on social media? And in terms of advertising, which is not related to social media, but my last point there, which is about different territories. If we're, increasingly seeing non-exclusive rights that are held by different parties, are we still going to see as much a party that has worldwide rights? If you're doing video sales, does it make sense maybe for video sales in a certain territory to be controlled by a certain party there who understands more what the audience there would like? So I wonder if we're going to start to see maybe more fragmented sales clauses that take into account really concepts that we've been seeing in film TV for a really long time, like windowing and territories. And I believe that those are the 5. So I'll just run through them really quickly. And if you have any questions in the chat, I would love to hear them. But again, how a podcast is defined in the agreement, who controls and monetizes distribution rights, if they're held non-exclusively, have you gone into detail over how they're going to be addressed and really thinking through it in practice? How are live events, merch, and other derivative rights managed? Same question, depending on who's managing them. How are they going to be done in practice? Are there minimum commitments, even in a scenario where they are managed by different parties? How does the deal optimize for promotion on social media? I think that's a question a lot of ad sales partners are going to ask and want to know, well, exactly what can we go and pitch the advertisers? What's on the table for what can be done on social media? And it may be the answer that everything needs to be decided on a case by case basis, but they may want to know, is there a baseline of things we can go tell advertisers that they'll get or not? And last but not least, do the advertising clauses take into account both audio and video advertising needs? So with that, I will stop and see if there are any questions or thoughts. And if not, we can wrap up. No? I don't see any. I think Nancy will hand it over back to you.
Great, Alexia, thank you so much for that information. We're definitely um, appreciative for it. If there are no questions, please make sure to take down her contact information. So, in case you don't feel comfortable technically in this format, asking some personal questions, please feel free to send her an email as long as that's okay with you, Alexia.
Yeah, please. Definitely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar.
Bye, everyone. Thanks again. There was a question about getting the recording.